Schools are required to create IEPs, which are individualized education plans for all students who receive special education services. So, how should we as BCBAs approach the IEP process? Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna. We're behavior analysts who create weekly content about how to teach children with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about the IEP process. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So, if anyone has started a business, we did. And in starting this business, we had to go through lots of contracts, some legal documents that really are very intimidating because I didn't understand any of them. And there were two of us involved, and a lot of things that we had to know about when starting this business. So often I would consult with a lawyer that I trusted or someone that I know who understood those contracts that could advise me. Shayna would do the same thing on her side because without having that person who can advise us, I would have been completely lost. And I think it's really similar when we talk about an IEP document, which really is a contract between, the parents and the school in terms of what the goals are and what the school is going to be working on. But there's a lot of ways that it could be really intimidating. So we're going to talk about how we can help support this IEP process as BCBAs.
Let's first talk about what is an IEP and what does that stand for? Because in ABA, we know there's a lot of terminology. So an IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. And like Shira mentioned, it's really a contract between the parents and the school and what's happening during that school year and how is the school and all the parties involved best going to support the needs of your child.
So you could be a BCBA who works on the school team, or you could be a BCBA who really works for the family and is consulting. And those are two different options, kind of depending on which team you're on when you're signing this contract. In either case, you should be advocating for the child, obviously, and the student, and helping to support the family. And if you are coming in with the family because you're consulting to the family and you're called in to help support the IEP process, the goal of the IEP is to give the child access to the general education curriculum and to be most successful in the least restrictive environment. So often the IEP will have a description of what classroom setting it is. So whether it's a gen ed class or it might be what we call the least restrictive classroom, means that we want there to be as much independence as possible. So often you put in a classroom that has one-to-one support, or the students are not being exposed to as much academic curriculum versus a general ed classroom. So we want our goal to always be the least restrictive environment for the kids, with accommodations and modifications. So if certain accommodations and modifications will allow them to be successful in the gen ed classroom, that's the goal. If even with those modifications and accommodations, they wouldn't be successful in that gen ed classroom, either for safety or for other reasons, then they would go into a little more restrictive environment. But still, they would have those accommodations and modifications. And what that means is that there are ways that we're going to accommodate the learner. So it might be with seating. They may have to sit at the front of the class. They may have to sit on a bouncy ball. They may be accommodated with reinforcement systems or visual schedules or things like that. And a modification is a way that we are changing the curriculum to meet the needs of the learner. So they may be doing a different level math than the rest of the class. They may have different expectations on their tests, which is a modification.
When I look up, when I'm thinking about accommodations and modifications, typically I look to the people in the school board, a teacher in the classroom most of the time, or the special education teacher who's been hired by the school or the school board, who's able to say, well, these are the modifications to the curriculum we can do. I'm not an expert on curriculum, so I'm not going to be suggesting, well, why don't we do this with curriculum and that with curriculum, unless I really, know what I'm talking about. But in terms of accommodations, that's where, as a BCBA, I'm an expert. And I am an expert typically with the client I'm supporting. I know this client if I'm coming in with the parent and representing them on behalf of the parent because they've been my client for a while, or if I am Shira's more part of the school board, but usually she's following a client for a while as well when she's sitting in on these meetings. And accommodations, like Shira said, can be anywhere from frequent breaks to sitting on a bouncy ball to using a specific pencil grip and that kind of thing. If you're really looking for strategies and suggestions for other accommodations. A lot of the time I use my friend called Google, but I'll Google things like accommodations for kids with attention difficulties, and accommodations for kids with autism. And then it comes up with a whole list that's fairly exhaustive. Some of the accommodations that I've put on or that I've gotten put on IEPs are things like, sits at the front of the classroom, or sits near the teacher because the teacher's not always at the front of the classroom, or, sits away from the window or away from the door, wears noise canceling headphones or has noise canceling headphones available. Those kinds of things get put into the IEP, and those are huge. Maybe they need access to frequent breaks. Sometimes I define what frequent breaks are, because sometimes, learners can be out of the classroom most of the day and only in instruction for tiny, tiny periods because their IEP says, quote unquote, frequent. So defining that as well. And the other thing on IEPs, or that should be on IEPs, are measurable goals. And when I say measurable, like I said before, it's not just about frequent or that, they're going to be doing this some of the time or all of the time. It's about how often and percentages.
Yeah, so if you think of accommodations, almost like when we write a behavior plan, it's those proactive strategies. How can we set up the environment in order to make the student most successful? And for things like modifications and even other accommodations, there's often other professionals on the team that will join you. So there'll be often a school psychologist, a speech and language pathologist, maybe an OT or PT, and then you as the BCBA, that really is your focus, is those accommodations. The other area that you're really going to focus in on is the behaviors. There's sometimes a separate behavior page, behavior intervention plan, however it works in that school, is they're going to be looking to you to really help support that behavior plan, whether there's a behavior reduction goal, but we know as BCBAs that with every goal you need to decrease, there's going to be another replacement skill that you need to work on increasing. So you want to really advocate for, an observable and measurable and realistic behavior reduction goal, and at the same time advocating for an appropriate skill replacement skill goal. So it's often communication, tolerance, weighting, anything like that. And you want to get that put into the IEP because we want everybody to be working on appropriate replacement skills and not just working on behavior reduction.
And that's huge, right? Because sometimes schools will say, well, they need to, reduce this, reduce this, reduce this. And then if there's not teachable skills, then what happens is what we call whack-a-mole, right? So as one behavior decreases, another one pops up in its place because we really haven't given them a strategy to use instead. So teaching functional communication can help. Teaching weighting skills is also huge. So what really the role of a BCBA, so like Shira said, there's two different roles or two different BCBA roles, one's with the parent and one's with the school. Let's talk about the one who's there to support the parent. An IEP meeting can be very intimidating because, like Shira said, there's a lot of professionals that can be around that table at the meeting. There's usually the school principal, there's sometimes a principal from another school, there's usually a school psychologist and or an SLP or an OT. Like there's a ton of people around this table, and as a single person walking into this meeting as a parent, it can be really overwhelming. So, half your job as a BCBA who's there to support the family is to really just be that calmness in the room and just provide support and comfort to that parent, is half of it. And then the other half is, like I said, to prepare the parent and say, okay, this is what you can expect. There might be a lot of people around the table, again, helping with that calmness as well. And then the other piece would be to talk in regular language. And that will help, parents go, okay, this is just a meeting among people instead of, oh, there's all these professionals using these terms that I don't understand and everything else. So it's a big job.
And what we'll sometimes do if we're going to a meeting with a parent is get the IEP in advance. The school has to give it to the parent before the IEP meeting so the parent can read it over. So we'll sometimes review it with the parent, explain it to them, like break it down. It's a lot of jargon. It's a lot of technical measurement and goals and things like that. And we'll talk with the parent about, like, is this in line with what you want for your child? Like, there's so many goals that we can work on with our students. Don't you want to have, more of a life skills goal, or do you want to have a communication goal, or you want to just really have reading and be a priority for your child? And so while you're looking at the goals themselves to see if they're good goals, you're also looking at the big picture and seeing, like, does this document represent what you want your child to be working on during their school year? Because that's really going to be what the teachers are focusing on. So you need to advise the parents in that way and explain it to them in advance of the meeting so that we can all come into the meeting knowing what we want to discuss. You often have a very short amount of time and there's a lot of people. And so you want to be prepared with the parent and come in with somewhat of an agenda of the things that are really high priority for you as the parent. The other place that I often review IEPs is on what is really observable and measurable. Sometimes goals are written in a way that isn't really realistic or isn't really doable. So depending again on which side you're on, whether you're supporting the school or the parent, sometimes we could really use our skill set in measurement to help support the way the goals are written. If they're written as SMART goals, then they need to have the measurement component. And so having it done in a way that they can have ongoing data, because I find that sometimes IEP goals are written with the best intentions, but it's something like, completely unrealistic to actually take ongoing data on. And without that ongoing data, it makes the whole document really meaningless, right? We want this to be a living document. We want it to be written in a way that someone's always going to keep referring to it and keep looking back and saying, oh, look, they're at 60% of their goal or at 70% of their goal. And now they've mastered their goal. So let's move on. But if the goal is written and then tucked away in a closet and never looked at again because it's completely unrealistic to take percentage data on greeting another student, if they only come into the classroom once a day, then you're not going to be set up for success. So we want to advise the school, the teachers, and the parents in making those goals really measurable and realistic for a classroom. Percentage data is often very challenging. We use often things like rating scale or probe data for a classroom, and that makes it a lot more doable.
I'm smiling every time you say percentage data. You can tell, Sherry, you've worked in the classroom for many years because you're like, I've got 20 kids. I can't take per opportunity data for these kids. It doesn't make sense. I can only take something that's really quick and easy to do. You mentioned SMART goals. When you say SMART goals, we all have, the acronym in our head, but what does it actually mean, breaking it down?
So SMART goals it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So specific meaning that your goal is not too big and not too small, but like specific enough that you know what it is that you're working on. So it's not just, reading comprehension, but it might be specifically like with this level and with this type of book and what the expectations are. Measurable means that you can have some way of tracking progress. So whether that's frequency, duration, rating scale, percentage, probing, any one of those methods are ways to measure whether they're accomplishing their goal. You want it to be achievable. So depending on how often the school writes an IEP, sometimes it's every 4 months, 6 months, or every year, you want them to be able to achieve their goal within that amount of time. So you want to write a goal that's realistic for them to achieve within, 4 to 6 months. Relevant, meaning the goal should be aligned with whatever the values and long-term goals are for the student. So if long-term, this student really needs to, be able to live independently and have a real life skills focus, then the goal should be relevant to that type of long-term goal. And then time-based. It should be based on some amount of time. So you could say, over 2 days or within, 3 times a week or whatever that is, but have some sort of measure of time in addition to the other measure. So by having these goals be SMART goals and then using them and continuing to reference them, it means that you're going to have really an ongoing way to track progress.
I think the real take-home message here is that IEPs need to be measurable, but they also have to be clear and they have to have, language that everyone understands. Keep in mind who the end user is. The reader of this IEP report is going to be the teacher and possibly the paraprofessional in the classroom. And in that case, we don't need the IEP to be 24 pages long because they're not going to be reading it. It needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be doable. So, those keeping in mind those SMART goals, keeping in mind the measurable piece of it as well. If it's a behavior goal, for instance, if we know the function, we don't need to do an ABC chart every single time for 6 months in a row. We do an ABC chart to find the function, and then we can move to something quick like frequency, using a lot of probe data as well.
And you want to make sure also as a BCBA, it can be easy to, use jargon and become somewhat confrontational. And be the expert on behavior, but at the same time, you really need to align yourself with both the school and the parent. You need to offer your services to help train the staff, offer data sheets that are going to be doable and realistic for the teacher to take data on. Find a way that you can support the family and support the school and advocate for the child, because you want this meeting to be productive for the child. So really present yourself as someone who's aligned with the school and the parent, and someone who can really help support and train the staff. How can I help make this successful? What can I offer to make this IEP be translated into the classroom and to really be used? So really having that impression on the school in your meetings.
We have another podcast that's actually an interview with an IEP advocate, and you should check it out. It's with Annie McLaughlin. So check out that podcast episode as well.
For more information on the IEP process, click the link on or around this video or in the description to claim your free download on choosing the right data collection method. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos, and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.